schizophrenia, neurodevelopmental disorders. Also, we're going to throw in some neurocognitive disorders too, just for fun. It's great. Can't have that on a title though. That's too much for a title. That's crazy talk. Here we go. Neurodevelopmental disorders. We'll start here. They involve personal, social, academic dysfunctions, usually coming about in childhood, adolescence. When you hear them, you'll be like, oh yeah, childhood and adolescence. They're often a spectrum. So we have a range of intensity, right, from really affected to not so much, and have lots of different symptoms they include. So the first one, we'll talk about three. The first one we'll talk about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You're familiar with this, I'm sure. Persistent loss of focus, restless behavior, and struggling really to reel in those impulses. Seeks immediate gratification. So kids, again, it's a spectrum. So we have really mild cases and sometimes really severe cases where kids can just not control their impulses and urges. It's most often treated with medication, and it may be inheritable. So it could be passed down from parents to kids. The second one here, we have autism. This is the one you probably think most with spectrum. Characteristics, it's lots of different ones. Atypical behavior, trouble with communication, varying interests, varying thought patterns. Underlying key here is trouble with socialization. So trouble with communicating and connecting with other people. Symptoms for this appear usually pretty darn young, around 2, and difficulty interpreting social cues. So that's like struggling to understand other people's body language or emotions, and then in turn, having trouble expressing their own emotions. They often prefer routines over spontaneity, and physical touch can sometimes be an issue too, but really don't like things to be unexpected, really like that set routine, knowing what's going on. And then the third one here is intellectual disability, and this is defined by having less than a 70 IQ. So if you think back to statistics, 100 IQ is average, so 2 standard deviations down would be 70. 1 standard deviation below the norm would be 85. 2 would be 70, so having an IQ below 70 would define intellectual disability. One example is Down syndrome. Intellectually disabled people often experience things with limitations in learning, solving problems, trouble with communication, and just everyday skills, going to the grocery store, taking the bus, basic life skills like that. All right, neurocognitive disorders, this is kind of on the opposite side. So whereas neurodevelopmental is adolescence, neurocognitive usually happens later in life. Decreased mental functioning because of a somatogenic cause. So that's a biological or an organic, a physical cause in the brain rather than psychological cause. So illnesses, brain trauma, chemical imbalances. One example is Clive Waring. If you remember him, he had a virus infection that destroyed part of his hippocampus, and then he could no longer form long-term memories. So he had old long-term memories, but he couldn't convert new short-term memories into new long-term memories. His attention span was only about 30 seconds. But that's an example of a somatogenic cause. Alzheimer's, this is progressive memory loss, meaning it gets worse over time. People with Alzheimer's will struggle to understand what's going on, communicate, maybe not be able to recognize familiar family and friends. Multiple sclerosis is nerve damage in the brain. So if you think back with multiple sclerosis, we talked about this in the biology unit, but it attacks the myelin sheath. And I like to remember that because they both start with MS, right? So MS, multiple sclerosis, MS, myelin sheath. The myelin sheath insulates and speeds communication. So this makes sense with some of the symptoms, causing numbness or trouble walking. Think about if your feet are the first ones, you have numbness in your toes. That's one of the longest places to communicate from your feet all the way up to your brain. That slowed communication because of the deteriorated myelin sheath is what causes that. Vision problems is also common. And then delirium, impaired attention, lack of awareness, struggles with recent memories, maybe rambling speech, and also can mess up sleep patterns, different emotional states because of not understanding really what's going on. All right, schizophrenia, here we go. Psychiatric disorder that impacts your perception of reality. And to be clinically defined as schizophrenia, it's pretty hard to do. So you have to have 2 or more of these symptoms for at least 1 month. Now, there's positive and negative symptoms. So positive, think addition. Think you're adding these new characteristics to a person, versus negative is you're taking away normal characteristics. So positive symptoms include hallucinations, this is the most common. So we have sensory experiences without actual stimulation. Most often it's auditory, so hearing things, but it also can be visual or other things as well. Delusions, fixed false beliefs, grandiose thoughts. One example, thinking like the government is leaning on you to solve problems, to find clues in newspapers. That would be a delusion. It's grandiose, you're very important, but it's not actually happening. I am God, something like that. And then thirdly, disorganized thinking and speech. Now, negative symptoms, things that are taken away, a flat affect, so not being able to show emotions, physically with your face, or just really be able to express emotions, impaired attention and decision making. And you can see how a positive symptom like a hallucination would then lead to a negative symptom like impaired attention. So if you're hearing voices, it's going to be very difficult to concentrate on something that somebody's telling you. And then the third one is catatonia. And this is really interesting. It's almost like people become like a wax statue. You become physically frozen over time. You're in this motionless stupor. So you're immobile. You can't move. You're frozen and you don't talk or communicate. Very interesting subcategory of schizophrenia. All right, here's an awesome video. I'm not going to show it right now, but I have the link down below if you want to check it out. It's just like 4 minutes, but this is Anderson Cooper, and he goes through this experiment of having schizophrenia, trying to experience what that's like. You can see he's got earbuds in, and they're pumping these sounds and voices, and then they go through a couple experiments. He tries to solve some cognitive problems. He walks through the streets, and he just kind of expresses like what it's like and how difficult it is just to do normal things. So 2 things, if you do watch it, 2 things to think about. Notice how the experimenter clears his short-term memory. So she asks him some questions. She has him clear short-term memory. Notice that if you go back to our memory unit, think about a short-term memory, 7 plus or minus 2, also about 30 seconds. How does she do that? And the second thing, like I was just talking about, how do his positive symptoms lead to those negative symptoms? So check that out if you'd like. It's down below. And last thing we got here is the causes of schizophrenia. There's a high likelihood of genetic predisposition. For example, in general population, incidences are only about 1 in 100, but if your relative, if a close family member has schizophrenia, your rates increase. And check this out, incidence jump to 1 in 2 for twins. So very heritable. 3 thoughts about why this comes about. Dopamine hypothesis, saying that schizophrenia is associated with high levels of dopamine. So not like a dopamine rush when you eat like a delicious meal or a big ice cream cone. It's not that dopamine. It's your resting level of dopamine is too high. So antipsychotic drugs actually lower a person's dopamine levels, and that helps lessen some of those symptoms. Diathesis is having a predisposition to the disease. Schizophrenia can then be triggered by stress. So it's not caused by stress, but often symptoms come out like in a stressful situation. So you've always had schizophrenia, but stress would trigger and get some of those symptoms going. And then the third one is brain abnormalities. You can see in this picture back here, well, you can't because my face is in the way. Hold on. Zoom. So you have smaller frontal lobe in the schizophrenic brain. So you can see in the pictures there, the healthy brain up top, schizophrenic brain right there. And there's also less activity. So if you're in an fMRI machine, there's going to be less frontal lobe activity. And you see the enlarged ventricles in the temporal lobe. So you can see the middle there, much bigger area, less gray matter in the schizophrenic brain. All right, that's it. Holy smokes, we went fast. Let's do 3 review questions real quick, and then we'll be done for the day. Awesome. All people, that all is a big key there. All people with schizophrenia suffer from delusions of persecution, multiple personalities, major depression, distorted thinking, or a flat affect. What do you think? There's a hint in the picture. The correct answer is D, distorted thinking. D for dip. Man, I love dips. I also love snacks and football parties. I don't know. A delusion is a misperception of auditory and visual stimuli, characteristic of people suffering from ADHD, faulty and disorganized thought patterns, first indication of dissociative disorders or phobia of being in social situations. A lot of food themes right here, right now. I must be hungry. Delusion is C for chimichanga. It's faulty, disorganized thought patterns. Nice. Last question here. Ooh, quite the picture, not food this time. Which of the following is a negative symptom of schizophrenia? Negative symptom. Delusional thinking, incoherent speech, hyperexcitability, hearing voices, or a flat affect. Remember, positive, adding, negative, taking away. It's not Europe. It's not England. It is the Elizabeth Tower. E, flat affect. Big Ben is the clock. The tower is the Elizabeth Tower. Real quick, before you quit, give me a quick 20-word summary, one-sentence summary of these notes. Look over them real fast. It's going to ingrain it in your brain. You guys are the best. Have a fantastic day. I go eat a chimichanga for lunch. Yum. All I have is an apple. I'm going to go eat an apple. One more sip of coffee left. Yes, that's a win. Couple more days of Mustache March, though. I'm excited about that. Yes.